and thank you for joining us on this morning's Campfire chat. I had the privilege of meeting Veronica earlier this year. She has been the CEO of the Children's Health Foundation of Vancouver Island since 2016, and on her watch, the organization has thrived. Prior to this, she worked for nonprofits across Canada, most recently in BC, where she successfully raised funds for a new ICU and new diagnostic center for the Delta Hospital Foundation. She brings a wealth of insights and practical experience to our chat this morning, so let's get started. Well, I guess we should mention a favorite drink before we get going. How about you, Veronica?
We're going to talk about drinking so early in the morning, okay?
Oh, I know.
Yes. Well, no, I mean, I'm gonna have a little shout out to a local bee to bottle Tugwell Creek Honey Farm and Meadery, which is on the southwest coast of Vancouver Island. They do a fantastic mead. And if you're ever on Vancouver Island, please look them up and go and, taste it and enjoy. But this morning I'm sticking with my chai tea. So there you go.
Well, that's understandable. Well, the one I've selected, and I guess it's probably in light of that very interesting election south of the border, but I do enjoy a nice red wine. In the cooler fall weather, I like a more full-bodied red wine, and one of our standbys is J-Lore 7 Oaks Cab Sav.
Yes.
So that's what I kind of like this time of year. Yeah,
it's also very, very good. So.
Well, we're very excited to have you here this morning. And in the introduction of the chat, it was observed that we're living through extraordinary times. And normally for nonprofits, the last quarter of the year is when we really focus on our fundraising. And of course, this year, that's coinciding with the second wave of the pandemic, which continues to accelerate. And this has introduced a whole new level of stress on staff and on our donors. And just would be very interested to have your perspective on what impact this is having on you and your staff, how you're adapting. And I think also you've talked a little bit about self-care. Would be interested to have your perspectives on that.
Right, yes. Well, you're absolutely right. This is, as that word unprecedented is tossed around at this time, but it's absolutely true. There's no playbook for where we're at and where we're going. If I think back to March, which seems like a lifetime ago for many of us, but really 9 months ago, 9 months, which in and of itself is a long time. But I think in the beginning, there was a real, I would say almost like a real fear of what was about to happen and a fear of how it was going to disrupt, the work that we do, the communities that we live in, the people that we serve. And, my staff and I at that point, I think what we did, luckily we were able to transition working from home to working from home relatively easily. So that was a good thing. We didn't have to struggle with that, which I know many of my colleagues had to deal with that right off the get-go. But I started in the beginning thinking about how can we take care of staff, because understanding that the team needs to make sure that we that we're here for one another, that we're doing the best that we can to stay healthy and stay, really focused on ensuring that we bring our best selves to the work that we do. Fundraisers tend to be very optimistic. So, I was not necessarily worried about that, but once again, we didn't know where we were going. So, we did, online yoga classes. We had an instructor do, Zoom classes with the staff group. We actually engaged someone to help us with mindfulness so that we could really ground ourselves in the moment, so that when we were talking to our donors and talking to one another, that we acknowledged where we were, how we were feeling and how things were going. So I would say that The second wave is probably going to be a little bit different than that, thank goodness, because we've survived. We know that our communities are, by and large, okay. Our donors have made some really wise choices in terms of things that they're doing, the bubbles. In BC, Rod, we've got Dr. Bonnie Henry, she's quickly becoming a heroine.
Saint Bonnie Henry.
For all time, that's right. But I think that we have done a really good job of kind of ensuring that we're safe. And so when your safety is taken care of, then really you think about, okay, well, how do I go about adjusting the work that I have to do? And how I engage with donors, with board members, volunteers, and what does that look like now? But some of my colleagues, and specifically my major gift and plan giving, capital giving, or capital campaign staff, and our events managers, they have done an extraordinary job of really trying to figure out what would working with donors look like? How do we make donors comfortable with having phone calls, Zoom calls, embracing the technology where that's appropriate, doing driveway visits, making sure that where donors felt comfortable, we too could meet them where they were at.
And I guess in this process, one of the things we've learned is that our donors have been impacted differently. So the economists have talked about a V-shaped recovery, a K-shaped recovery, a W-shaped recovery. And one thing that's clear is that this pandemic has affected, it's fallen disproportionately on people. Some people seem to have been, many people, relatively unaffected, at least economically. I don't think we could say we're unaffected psychologically, but
right.
So as you're reaching out to your donors, do you find that you sort of have tailored your responses differently, or how is the current environment affecting how you're reaching out to them and engaging with them?
I would say over the last 9 months, we've gone back to basics in terms of a lot of the, stewardship activities that all of us know are, the best practices. Thanking, acknowledging, reaching out to see how they're doing. Would they like more information? We have, I think, really gone back to those tried and true ways in which to engage donors, and it's worked by and large. I think in the beginning, we also took a moment to pause because our organization was right on the precipice of launching a capital campaign. And in fact, we are in the midst of a campaign right now. But we really did take a pause because there was an acknowledgement that, as you talk about, food security issues, housing issues. And so in our communities, we acknowledged that there were priorities that really had to be dealt with at the beginning. And I, as CEO, made a decision to perhaps step back and really kind of ensure that those immediate needs had the airtime and had donors' attention in a way that would be meaningful and respectful for colleagues who are trying to really raise significant dollars for emergency needs at that point in time. And I think by and large, on Vancouver Island, I think we were similar to other places. Once again, healthcare became very, very important because this was a virus. It had extreme impacts on everybody's health and well-being. And so many of my colleagues in the acute centers were, really overwhelmed with the love and care and support from their communities. So that was fantastic to see. And then there were others in, fundraising that were not necessarily frontline services or programs. And then, we had to really kind of take a moment to reflect on, wait a minute, we need to allow for our communities to lift up those who, as you say, have been disproportionately impacted by COVID, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and as that's unfolded, I think it's been interesting to see that there's been some surprises along the way. So
Mhm.
we see, I was reading an article in the Globe and Mail that the savings rate of Canadians has been a lot higher than one would have
Wow.
expected, both in the high net worth and more average type scenarios. And the food banks now are, I think we may have chatted about this yesterday, but the food banks are less, there's less demand on them than one would have thought. So these initial organizations that you were concerned about, it's sort of changed and evolved a little bit, isn't it? So do you feel a little more now freer to engage perhaps a little more in your normal end of year fundraising?
Yes, I would say absolutely. I think that, even in speaking with some of the, hairdressers, for example, those that are not necessarily in the healthcare, but or grocery clerks, for example,
Yeah,
that ability to receive government dollars like the CERB, I think went a long way of ensuring that people had a safety net.
yeah,
And so there was a huge, moment of relief where I think as Canadians, we looked around and recognized, yes, this CERB might have caught 75% of those that could have really done extraordinarily bad during this period,
yeah,
who didn't really have an option to be at home or, to work from home and or to not work at all. So yes, I would say that thankfully that worked. I
yeah,
think it goes a long way in that argument of providing, like the necessities, like ensuring that people have the means to be able to take care of themselves and
yeah,
all of that. I think this is a great example of how that can actually work to all of our benefit.
yeah,
But in our organization, we, and I know I've spoken to my colleagues, there are folks who they did fall through those cracks and they
yeah,
continue to be challenged. I mean, we know that the mental health programs and services that we and others provide funding for, I mean, the need for those services are now off the charts.
yeah,
And it's not just, I mean, it's not just one segment of society. This has created a sense of anxiety and fear that
yeah,
I think is, once again, unprecedented, right?
yes, I would
So
agree.
I, I do think that we're going to see the need for the work that we do in the nonprofit and charitable sector change, evolve, but I think
Mhm.
increase in ways that perhaps we only see a glimmer of. And looking at some of the information that's coming out about what's happening with teens, what's happening with that sort of very socially engaged, perhaps hormone driven group of our
Yeah,
communities,
yeah,
and the impact that this is having on them. So I don't know if we can necessarily say that we see clearly what the future is going to hold. I think we're getting glimmers of where we are going to have to really fortify support in our sector.
yeah,
Uh, and I do think that, once again, the relevancy of the work that we do, absolutely. You and I chatted about, how our organization has really gone back to our mission and vision statement
mhm,
and
mhm,
done that look at, does this continue to make sense? Like what we are trying to do and the challenges and the issues that we're trying to resolve and the folks that we're serving, are those needs and are those challenges are they here now, and are they going to continue to be those that we should really be
yeah,
addressing, or has that
yeah.
fundamentally shifted?
Well, I think that's great, a great example of good leadership. Um, you, I mean, this has been a complete exogenous shock that's affected us all, and to go right back to basics and examine, okay, is our mission still relevant? Why are we doing what we're doing?
Yeah.
I that just seemed to me like to be a great example of very good leadership. And so you went through that process, didn't you? Of really just, okay, let's pull this all apart and make sure we're where we need to be.
Yes, exactly. And, we're about to go into, as you talked about when we started off, our busiest fundraising period. It's also our planning and budgeting for next year.
Yeah.
And boy, that is getting to be a really interesting exercise, right? It's kind of like having a bit of the Ouija board out to determine, okay, wait, what are we doing? No. But I think that what I feel very hopeful about is that once again, it's really brought into focus, I think, the need for communities to rally as as a unit, so that we can actually work together collaboratively, that we look across some of the different sectors, and we say, how do we better support our communities? Because understanding like what is going to ensure the safety and security, for example, in South Island, is a little bit different than Mid-Island, North Island, but similarly, like we have to make sure our long-term care facilities are absolutely fantastic, that our acute centers are fantastic, that our educational opportunities for young people and post-secondary are firing on all cylinders. Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think there's a great opportunity here. One of the as we think of our donors, when we're involved in a really challenging situation like we are right now, it can be liberating and exciting to be engaging in things else beyond yourself. Right. So I think for a lot of people, there's a desire to make an impact, do something helpful. Yeah. And so I'm thinking that this is a great, as you're talking about the needs of our communities, this is a great opportunity as we reach out to our donors and engage with them to give them a deeper purpose, something exciting to engage with. So are you noticing that as you're reaching out to your donors, that there's they're behaving perhaps differently than they have in the past, or do you see this as an opportunity? Or
I think it's early days to say whether we've shifted the way that donors are interacting. But, Imagine Canada, CAGP, AHP, AFP, they're all trying to determine, has the work that we're doing shifted, or is it an incremental change? And really, we're on a journey that, we're not necessarily going to see the change, but we're going to feel it year over year. I think, once again, Rod, I do believe that, looking at the mission and the vision and really understanding what specifically are we trying to do in community, and who are our natural partners, how do we bridge, working with some of our colleagues, whether it's in municipal government, school, like education, school boards, other nonprofits. I've been at some very interesting tables over the last number of months where even looking at space, it was a fascinating conversation people have been having about how do we rethink or reimagine the way that we allocate or use space that's available in our communities, because space is a big deal for COVID. So when we can access larger spaces, that means that we can do donor events, for example. We can have information sessions. We can provide really safe environments, and do all the important work that has to be done. Because, you and I, we won't rub it in, but, our winters tend to be, we can actually do stuff outside. Golfing, eating, having, our lovely drinks that we talked about, with heaters. We do that stuff, right? So, but at some point, these things will become untenable to be outside all the time. However, I was so excited to be a part of a conversation where people were saying, okay, well, what about, how can we repurpose that skating rink, for example, in the times that the people aren't skating, for example. Could we
Right.
actually utilize that to host different community events?
Well, and you were sharing some other things that you've been doing to sort of foster on a smaller scale interactions with your donors. I think I remember you mentioning, well, share some of the things you've been doing. Coffee chats or something? Was that what you were doing?
Yeah. And I mean, my colleagues would be, they were so not necessarily desperate, but they really wanted to ensure that donors knew that we were here for them.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
because in many our donor base is like everyone else's, tends to skew older, and people are isolated. We wanted to make sure that they knew that we were there for them. We have donors on our database who've been giving to us almost 3 decades. So these are folks who know us and who we know, and we wanted to make sure that they understood we actually, we want to know how you're doing, and is there anything that we can do, like how else can we support you? We're an organization that deals with children and youth, but really our donors are the backbone of the future work that we're going to do with families. So really understanding that they're a part of the family and they're a part of the team, and how can we make sure that they get that message. So we called everyone. We were calling every donor who made a donation. We made sure that we tried a bunch of we've got a whole bunch of new activities going on. So, text to give, all that kind of stuff. So telemarketing, we've gone back to, will people actually answer their phone? Do they have landlines? Yes. So some of those outreach activities have been so wonderful, because just to have a friendly voice on the other end of the phone is exactly what some of our donors really appreciated.
Well, so important, during this time, and also at this time, it's not clear. Many parts of the country are some parts are going into lockdown, and then it's not clear what the final shape will be. So sounds like those activities you're doing are flexible and can help foster closer relationships with your donors. We're finding at this time that people are certainly mindful of the big picture. So when we're talking with our clients, and you're talking about kind of their estate planning, that sort of thing, it's top of mind. It's just added a level of shall I say, a bit of urgency or clarity. So are you finding that as well in your conversations with your donors?
And I would say too, I mean, there were a lot, I heard from colleagues where a lot of the frontline healthcare workers were reaching out and having their estate plans finalized, because they didn't really understand the enormity or the impact that COVID was going to have on them personally, because they are more than anyone exposed to all of the bad things that COVID brings, right? And so I do know that we've had a number of elderly donors who I think they've solidified their plans. So, where I think it might have been something that was perhaps a bit more, perhaps I'll take care of that later, less of an urgency. I would imagine, and we have heard that is, they want us to have those gift agreements in place, because they want to understand it specifically, are we able to do what they would like to have done, because they do see that perhaps if they do get sick, that this may not end well for them. And I don't know if we've necessarily had something like that before, where it's really been a total healthcare unknown as to where this is all going. So I would agree with you. I think that we know that we're in the midst of ensuring that people know we've got a long-term vision, that,
Yeah.
we're good stewards of the dollars that they entrust with us. All of those messages, once again, getting really clear about what are we, once again, raising dollars for, how will we utilize those gifts that come in through legacy gifts.
Yeah.
And I mean, it just helps crystallize the relationship and
Yeah.
also the work that we do, and that we do with wonderful allies like you, Rod, that really
Oh,
talk
thank
to
you.
our donors about how they can ensure that the things that they care about continue, even though they're no longer with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's just wonderful chatting with you. We've covered, as you may suspect, those that are listening, we have talked before, and it's been a wide range of conversations. So this morning, as we're getting close to winding up, is there anything that you, particular insights or observations or anything else that you would just like to comment on, or that you'd like to chat about?
Well, I think that the whole idea around self-compassion, and I know we talked a little bit about this, but what I would encourage everyone who is listening to, to check out Dr. Kirsten Ness, I believe. She's out of the US, and she talks about self-compassion, and she is a self-proclaimed self-compassion evangelist.
Wow.
And I do think that this is the time when we really need to be able to exercise that muscle. Self-compassion is about just being aware and embracing that this is very unusual. It is like a global pandemic. There are days when we're not going to feel our best. They may stretch longer. Your colleagues, your family, your community is going through exactly the same thing. But that we have to be kind with how we feel and the fears and anxieties that we might have. And that if we talk to one another, especially talk to ourselves like we would our best friend or a friend, you realize that we have to really lead with kindness. And in that, I think that we will find a way to bring out the best in one another. So self-compassion. Look her up. She's fantastic.
I will. No, I love a good book reference, and I think the timing is so good for that. And it's an area, frankly, I think we often struggle with. Sometimes we're our own worst critics, and
Totally.
and to recognize that these are, our societies have gone through times like this. I was reading a biography of a man that caught the Spanish flu and then went on to form an amazing company. But thank you for that reminder. That's great. Well, it's gone quickly this morning. We're near the end of our session. So thank you very much, Veronica, for being with us this morning and sharing your wisdom. It's been wonderful.
Well, thank you. Yes, nice to be here with you too, Rod.
Well, I'll just as we're winding up, I'll just remind everyone that our next Campfire chat is on Thursday, November the 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that's with Joan Cosby from DMP Golden Horseshoe area. And she'll be talking with Lori Fox, the director of CAGP's new legacy program, Willpower. So Serena will send you a reminder to sign up, or you can visit donormotivation.com to sign up. So thank you again, everyone, for being here this morning with us and sharing in this Campfire chat. And we wish you every success going forward. Thank you.
Yay.